Mr. President, fantastic to have you on the show once again, and Happy New Year. I want to talk about economic recovery because you're forecasting an incredibly strong growth rate in 2022, resilience in the face of COVID challenges. Walk me through what you're seeing and forecasting.
Thank you so much, Julia, for having me again in your show. It's a great honor. And let me begin by saying that Colombia has shown the world its resilience, as you well said. Last year, we're getting close to a 10% growth, which is the largest growth Colombia has ever reached in more than 100 years. That makes us very happy, and we expect this year to grow above 5%. And we'll be one of the economies that will grow the most in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the important thing is that we're doing this with massive vaccination. We're reaching 80% of the population with one dose, more than 60% with double dose, and we already have more than 5 million people that have received the booster shots. So we expect that by the end of February, we should be above 70% with double dose, and we want to be growing very fast with the vaccination on booster shots, especially for the population that are under high risk. And something I also want to highlight, Julia, is that this growth and this recovery has enabled many sectors. We are having today a revolution in the energy transition. We're expanding from 28 megawatts to more than 2,800 megawatts, the capacity of non-conventional renewables, and we have reached record highs in sales on low-income housing. We have also reached what is the most important real increase in the minimum wage in Colombia that has helped us to protect the social safety net. So we feel very proud that massive vaccination and sustainable recovery are the elements of this growth.
There's so much to discuss there. Very quickly, when do you see an end to the current peak in terms of COVID, and how quickly do you think you can get 80% of the population vaccinated?
Well, we expect to have maybe the double dose, 80%, maybe by the end of March.
Wow.
And because, Colombia is a big country, and we have a very dispersed country in a big territory. We have more than 1 million square kilometers, but we're accelerating this path. And I think people are being conscious enough that through massive vaccination, we can keep on handling the economic recovery. We're now facing the challenges of the Omicron, and we know that this challenge is big, but I think although we have seen some increase in lethality rates in recent days, the lethality rate is pretty much below what we saw in the third peak. So why is this happening? I think it's happening because we have reached massive vaccination, and something that is also very important. We decided that it was more important by the end of last year to expand the booster shots, especially when we saw people that are under elements of higher risk that should receive the booster in order to minimize lethality rates at the beginning of 2022. So I think that strategy worked. We have already reached 5 million people with the booster shot. We expect to get to 10 million people with the booster shot in a matter of 8 weeks. And I think that is also an additional protection. And this is helping us to keep on motivating investment, keep on motivating the expansion of labor force in our country. And I think this goes hand in hand with the idea that this year we will have maybe the biggest economy in Latin America in terms of economic growth.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it? And your inward investment and your encouraging of inward investment makes you an outlier, I know, in the region. Let's talk about inflation and some of the risks, though, potentially, that economic outlook, because the central bank is concerned, perhaps, that as good as raising the minimum wage is, it's good for people in the formal sector. Obviously, it doesn't benefit many people who work in the informal sector, and it could add to some of the inflation concerns. And people are already obviously facing rising food prices and energy prices, among other things. How concerned are you about perhaps some of the risks to the growth outlook from activities that the central bank has to do just to tamper down on rising prices?
Well, let me begin by saying that the inflation phenomenon at this moment is a global phenomenon. And I think it has been affected by some of the damage that have been produced in global value chains and in the cost of logistics and also in the availability of containers. This is a global phenomenon. Nevertheless, what is important is that Colombia had one of the lowest inflations in Latin America last year. Although it was high compared to recent years, our inflation rate was around 5.6. but our economic growth was above 9.7%, and it could be getting close to 10%. That puts us in a much better shape than other countries that had a growth that was below 5%, but they had inflation rates about 6 or 7. The second important element to highlight is that in terms of real interest rates, today the interest rate is below the inflation rate. That also makes Colombia a very attractive country and helps to have that dynamized credit, especially in sectors that have an aggregated value like the housing sector. And we expect the central bank to keep on handling the policy of inflation target. But I think we have to consider that since this is an external phenomenon, the increase of interest rates has to be done in a way that it doesn't limit or affects the dynamism of economic growth. So we have to balance two things. And one thing that you mentioned about the minimum wage increase, we had the biggest real increase in real terms last year was around 10%, but the inflation rate was 5.6, so it was about 4%. Why was this so important socially speaking? Because the worker class were the ones who were behind this economic growth. So we had to give a share, and especially considering that they were badly affected in 2020. And I think that the social safety net that we have created in Colombia has made us expand from less than 4 million beneficiaries of the subsidies program to almost 10 million people. This has kept the lowest income communities having the possibility to buy and to dynamize the economy, and we're also having this policy this year. So yes, we're conscious about the inflation phenomenon, but I think we have been able to handle with a very robust and transparent technical policy approach.
President Duque, I know you want to talk about environmental policy and some of the focus that you've done on that, which I'm going to talk to you about. But I also want to talk to you about the presidential elections, and I'm running out of time, so you have to promise to come on and speak to me before the end of your term, and then we'll talk about environmental policies. I know you've just passed the climate action bill. There's obviously a reliance on your country on the oil sector, and you've been critical, I think, in fostering inward investment to the sector. How do you balance that and the reliance of government receipts on tax revenues with a push to be cleaner and some of your targets on the environment front? Because I know it's a delicate balance and you're trying to achieve it.
Well, I think there are three very important elements, Julia, and I'll try to mention them very quickly. The most important is that Colombia is having the fastest energy transition in Latin America. When my administration began, we only had 28 megawatts of non-conventional renewables. Today, we're heading to have 2,800 megawatts by the end of this year. That's 100 times more than we had when my administration began. And that will put us in a situation where we'll have an energy matrix that is more than 85% renewable. So that makes Colombia the leader of the energy transition in Latin America. The second element that is very important is that we approved the energy bill that increases this non-conventional renewable energies, but it goes hand in hand with the climate action bill. And we have said that we want to be carbon neutral by 2050, reduce by 51% our CO2 emissions in 2030, and something that is very important, Julia. This year, we're not waiting until 2030. This year, we'll have 30% of the Colombian soil and in the Colombian maritime areas being declared a protected area. So this puts us also in a leadership role in the global pledge for nature. So Colombia is taking the lead of being carbon neutral, nature positive country. And I think we're doing this in a balance that is also to keep on using regular energy, but making the transition. This has to not be used by ideology or politics. This has to be based on science, and I think this transition is making a strong sense in Colombia. People feel very proud about this advance, and I think also the international community is seeing Colombia not only as a leader in the energy transition, but also as the country that is going to be the #1 producer of green hydrogen in the years to come.
Oh. President Duque, you mentioned it there, critical, the political outlook for the country too, beyond your time as president. Please come back and speak to us in the next couple of months and we'll talk about that too, vitally important. And thank you for your time once again today. Thank you.
Happy New Year for you.
Thank you.